The smell of ozone in the clinic was always sharper, right before a system failure. It hung in the recycled air, a metallic tang that tasted like a thunderstorm trapped in a tin can, mixing uncomfortably with the scent of antiseptic and singed synthetic fur. Dr. Edwin leaned over the operating table, his gloved hands steady, despite the tremor running through the floor of Asteria Hollow. Under the harsh glare of the surgical lamp, the patient, a bioengineered dredge ox used for heavy mining, was thrashing in its restraints. The creature was massive, a mountain of muscle and graft skin, but right now it was terrified. Its eyes, usually dull and obedient, were rolling wild and white in their sockets. "Steady," Edwin murmured, adjusting the flow of the sedative gas. "I know. The world is spinning the wrong way. Just breathe." "Heart rate is at 180 beats per minute," the drone hovering over his left shoulder announced. Biscuit, a floating sphere of battered white ceramic and optical sensors, spoke with a flatness that made the panic in the room feel even more acute. "Cortisol levels are rising by 300%. The subject is experiencing severe spatial dissonance." "It is the lull bloom," Edwin said, his voice tight. He made a precision incision along the ox's cranial ridge, exposing the interface where biological nerve endings met the station's navigation chip. "The moss is blooming in the lower vents again. It is scrambling the magnetic north perception of every creature on levels 5 through 8. He could see the infection. It wasn't bacteria. It was a corruption of the signal. The ox thought the floor was the ceiling. It felt like it was falling into an endless sky. Edwin felt a pang of sympathy that had not dulled in his 20 years of service on the frontier. To be lost in one's own mind was a cruelty he wouldn't wish on a machine, let alone a living thing. "Passing the neural clamp," Edwin ordered. Biscuit extended a small mechanical arm. "Clamp deployed. Doctor, I must remind you that your shift ended 2 hours and 15 minutes ago. Your biological efficiency is dropping. And the ox's suffering is rising. Priority overrides schedule, Biscuit." Edwin was about to bridge the corrupted nerve cluster when the clinic door didn't just open. It exploded inward. The pressurized seal blew out with a deafening hiss, followed by the screech of tearing metal. The heavy blast shutters buckled, warping, as if hit by a battering ram. Dust and debris flooded the sterile room, swirling in the ventilation currents. The dredge ox bellowed in terror, surging against the straps. Edwin threw his body over the open incision to protect the wound from the fallout coughing as the acrid smoke filled his lungs. "Security breach," Biscuit stated, unhelpfully calm. "External airlock 3 has been compromised." Through the haze of settling dust, a figure stumbled into the room. She did not walk. She crashed. She hit the floor hard, sliding across the linoleum until she slammed into the base of a supply cabinet. For a moment, she was just a heap of rags and shadows. Then she moved. She pushed herself up on trembling arms. She was humanoid, but the proportions were wrong. Limbs, slightly too long, movements too fluid for a human skeleton. Her skin was covered in a layer of fine gray dust, likely from the ventilation shafts, but beneath it, Edwin saw the faint, iridescent shimmer of fur. She lifted her head, and the surgical light caught her eyes. They were enormous, dominating her face with vertical slit pupils that blew wide in the low light. They glowed with a reflective tapetum lucidum, shining like 2 moons of gold and violet. A Felidari, a cat alien, and she looked like she had just crawled through the bowels of hell to get here. Before Edwin could ask if she was injured, the room turned red. A siren, deeper and more guttural than the standard fire alarm, began to wail. It was a sound that vibrated in the chest cavity, a sound reserved for the most catastrophic of threats. Alert, alert. Core pathogen detected. Biological containment protocols initiated. Level 4 quarantine in effect. The voice of the station's AI was devoid of panic, which made the message more terrifying. Heavy maglocks slammed home on the broken door, sealing the room off from the corridor, trapping them inside. Core pathogen. Edwin stood up, wiping dust from his face mask. Biscuit, scan her. Is she carrying a viral payload? Scanning. Biscuit whirred its optical lens, telescoping out. A fan of blue light swept over the trembling alien. Negative for viral markers, negative for bacterial toxins. However, her genetic signature is flagged. High priority reject. The alien woman coughed a harsh, rasping sound. She clutched her side where a dark stain was spreading across her tattered flight suit. She looked at Edwin, not with aggression, but with a terrified recognition. She knew exactly what that siren meant. "They are coming," she whispered. Her voice was husky, layered with a sub-vocal vibration that felt like a purr gone wrong. "Please, hide me." "Who is coming?" Edwin asked, stepping away from the operating table, his hands still raised in a non-threatening gesture. "The ones who keep the count," she gasped. Almost instantly, the transparency setting on the clinic's observation window flickered from opaque to clear. Standing in the corridor, looking through the reinforced glass, was a phalanx of station security officers in full riot gear. And in front of them, looking utterly out of place, in her pristine white synthetic silk suit, was Cassandra Pike. The envoy from Heliox Charter did not look like she had run here. She looked like she had been waiting around the corner. Her hair was pulled back in a severe geometric bun, and her expression was one of mild curiosity, like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. "Dr. Edwin," Cassandra's voice came over the internal comms, smooth and cool as liquid nitrogen. "Step away from the specimen. Do not make direct physical contact. That entity is property of the Deep Void Retrieval Protocol." Edwin looked at the woman on his floor. She was bleeding. She was shaking. "She is a patient," Edwin said, his voice hard. "And this is my clinic. You do not dictate triage in my room, Cassandra." "She is a Felidari exile," Cassandra corrected, tapping a datapad with a manicured fingernail. "Unregistered, unchecked. And according to the station logs, she is the cause of the nanite instability we have been tracking for 3 weeks." The security officers raised their shock rifles. The red lights of the laser sights danced across the alien woman's chest. The Felidari scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner between a sterilization unit and the wall. Her ears, long and tufted, flattened against her skull. She looked from the guns to Edwin, her eyes wide with a frantic calculation. She was analyzing her odds of survival and finding them to be 0. She needed an anchor. She needed a reason for the human male in the white coat not to open the door and let the wolves in. She lunged forward, not to attack, but to grab the hem of Edwin's lab coat. Her grip was iron-strong, her claws partially extended, snagging the fabric. "I have no credits," she hissed, the words tumbling out in a rush of desperation. "I have no localized currency. I am exiled. My lineage is broken." "Let go," Edwin said gently, trying to de-escalate the situation before the nervous security guards opened fire through the glass. "I am not going to hurt you." "I cannot be a good wife," she blurted out, her voice rising in pitch, cracking with fear. She stared up at him, her golden eyes locking onto his. It was a plea bargaining with the only currency she thought a male of any species would value. "I do not know your customs. I cannot cook your proteins, but my genetic matrix is compatible. I can give you heirs." The room went silent. Even the wailing siren seemed to pause for a breath. Edwin froze. The absurdity of the statement hung in the air, grotesque and heartbreaking. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the scars on her hands, the desperation in her posture, the way she offered her reproductive viability, as if it were a bribe to avoid execution. It spoke of a history of trauma, of a galaxy, where her species had been reduced to exotic commodities. He felt a cold fury rise in his chest, not at her, but at the universe that had taught her to say that. He reached down, the security guard's tensed fingers tightening on triggers. Cassandra watched with narrowed eyes. Edwin took her hand, the one gripping his coat, and gently unhooked her claws from the fabric. He did not pull away. Instead, he held her hand firmly, his thumb brushing over the knuckles, covered in soft velvet fur. "Listen to me," Edwin said, his voice low and distinct, carrying clearly to the comms unit, so Cassandra could hear every syllable. "You are not cattle. You are not a broodmare. And you are certainly not a bargaining chip." The alien woman blinked, confused. She had braced for rejection or acceptance, but not this. Not dignity. "You are worth more," Edwin said. He let go of her hand and turned to his drone. "Biscuit," Edwin said, his tone dry and professional. "Log a new entry. Patient name unknown. Species Felidari. Condition acute lacerations, exhaustion, and highly questionable negotiation tactics." "Logged," Biscuit chirped. "Shall I add delusional regarding interspecies marital standards to the symptoms list?" "Keep it strictly medical, Biscuit." Before Cassandra could retort, before the security team could override the lock, the floor jumped. It wasn't a vibration this time. It was a violent heave. The entire station groaned, the sound of 1,000,000 tons of metal screaming under stress. The lights in the clinic flickered and died, replaced instantly by the blood-red wash of emergency backups. "Warning, warning. Atmospheric pressure drop in Sector 9. Algae oxygen farm failure imminent. Cascade failure predicted in 12 minutes. The comms channel crackled, and Rosa Cade's voice burst through, shouting over the roar of escaping gas. "Edwin, are you there? The main intake valve on the Delta farm just sheared off. We are losing oxygen pressure across the residential ring. If the pressure drops below 70%, the fail-safes will purge the sector." "We're talking about 3,000 people suffocating." Edwin grabbed the comms unit. "Rosa, switch to manual bypass." "I can't," Rosa screamed. "The sensors are reading a toxic blockage. The computer won't let me open the valves because it thinks the air is poison. It's the Lull Bloom phantom signal again." Edwin looked at the sealed door. He was a doctor, but before that, he had been a combat medic, and before that, an engineer's son. He knew the layout of Asteria Hollow better than he knew the lines on his own palm. "I am coming down," Edwin said. "I can override the sensor hardline from the junction box." "You are in quarantine," Cassandra's voice cut in sharp and angry. "That door stays sealed, Doctor. If you break isolation, you will be arrested for aiding a biohazard." "There are 3,000 people gasping for air, Cassandra," Edwin roared, losing his cool. "Open the damn door." "Protocol stands," Cassandra replied coldly. "The specimen is the priority. The oxygen levels are an acceptable risk variable." Acceptable risk. The words tasted like ash. Edwin looked at the heavy blast door. He couldn't force it. Not from the inside. "The sensor is not broken," the voice came from the floor. The Felidari woman was standing up now. She was leaning against the wall, her eyes closed, one ear swiveled toward the ventilation grate near the ceiling. "What?" Edwin asked. "The sensor," she said, opening her eyes. "It is not broken. It is lying. I can hear it." She walked toward the grate, moving with a limp, but with undeniable grace. She pressed her palm against the metal mesh. "The nanites in the lichen are singing to the sensor. They are vibrating at a frequency of 440 hertz. It mimics the signal for sulfur dioxide. The computer thinks the air is acid." Edwin stared at her. "Can you hear the nanite frequency?" "I can hear the heartbeat of the walls," she said simply. Then she looked at him, her gaze intense. "You want to save the breathable air. I want to live through the night without being put in a cage. We trade." "You said you had no currency," Edwin noted. "I found some," she replied, a faint, sharp smile touching her lips. "I help you fix the lie. You give me sanctuary, one night. No questions." Edwin looked at the dying lights, then at the vent. It led into the service crawl space, a maze of pipes and cables that ran parallel to the main corridors. It was tight, dangerous, and completely off the security grid. It led straight to the oxygen farm control node. "One night," Edwin agreed, "and I treat that wound." "Deal!" She reached up, grabbed the grate, and with a strength that belied her slender frame, ripped the metal mesh from the wall. "After you, Doctor." The service tunnel was a nightmare of claustrophobia. It was barely wide enough for a human's shoulders, filled with bundles of fiber optic cables that hung like vines in a jungle of steel. The only light came from the intermittent flash of diagnostic LEDs, red, amber, green, and the twin glowing orbs of the alien's eyes ahead of him. It was freezing. The thermal shielding was thin here, and the cold of deep space seeped through the hull. Edwin's breath plumed in white clouds. "I am a veterinarian," Edwin grumbled, dragging himself over a bundle of conduit, his knees protesting against the hard grating. "I fix cows and domesticated lizards. I am not a mole. I was not built for subterranean athletics." "You are loud," the woman whispered from the darkness ahead. She moved silently, her body contorting to fit through gaps Edwin had to squeeze through. "The hunters will hear your breathing." "There are no hunters in the ventilation shafts," Edwin huffed. "Only dust mites and regret." "There are always hunters," she said, her voice devoid of humor. They crawled for what felt like an hour, though Biscuit's internal chrono marked it as only 7 minutes. The vibration of the station grew louder, a deep, resonant thrumming that rattled Edwin's teeth. They were getting close to the massive atmospheric circulators. "Here," she said, stopping at a junction box that was humming with an angry, discordant buzz. This was the sensor node for Sector 9. It was a black box the size of a human head, covered in blinking indicators. "Rosa was right," Edwin said, pulling a multi-tool from his pocket. He shone his light on the display. "It is reading lethal toxicity. If I cut the wire, the system defaults to fail closed. I have to trick it into thinking the air is clean." "Put the tool away," the Felidari said. She shifted her position, bringing her face close to the black box. "Metal tools are clumsy. They do not know how to ask." "Ask." "Quiet." She closed her eyes. She placed her fingertips lightly on the casing of the sensor. Then she opened her mouth. No sound came out. At least not a sound Edwin could hear with his ears. But he felt it. It started as a pressure in his sinuses, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to bypass his eardrums and resonate directly in his chest bone. It was a purr, but amplified, directed, and incredibly precise. It was biological, yet it possessed a mathematical structure. Edwin watched the display on the sensor node. The red numbers flickered. The woman's throat muscles rippled. She adjusted the pitch, tilting her head slightly. The vibration intensified. The loose screws on the casing began to rattle. Hertz frequency modulation, Edwin realized, stunned. She wasn't just making noise. She was generating a counter-resonance. She was shaking the nanites at a molecular level, disrupting their ability to bond and transmit the false signal. On the screen, the toxicity reading began to drop. 90%, 60%, 30%. "Come on," Edwin whispered. The woman's brow furrowed. Sweat cut tracks through the dust on her face. This was costing her. She was burning metabolic energy at a terrifying rate. The wound on her side began to bleed faster, the red spot expanding on her suit. "You are hurting yourself," Edwin warned. She ignored him. The purr deepened, becoming a growl that vibrated the floor plating. 0%. Atmosphere nominal. With a heavy thunk, the magnetic locks on the massive oxygen valves disengaged. A rush of fresh, pressurized air hissed through the pipes above them. The station's vibrations smoothed out, returning to its rhythmic, healthy hum. "Stable," Biscuit announced from Edwin's pocket. "Oxygen saturation levels returning to normal. Crisis averted." The alien woman slumped against the cable bundle, gasping for air. The glow in her eyes dimmed. Edwin crawled forward, reaching for her. "I have never seen physiology used like that. You reorganize the nanite clusters with sound." She pushed his hand away weakly, but there was no malice in it. I told you. I am worth the trade. Yes, Edwin said, and he meant it. You are. By the time they managed to sneak back into the clinic, using a maintenance hatch that opened behind the sterilization autoclave, the rumors were already moving faster than light speed. The lockdown had lifted the moment the biological threat, Sable, had vanished from the initial room, leaving security confused, and Cassandra furious. Now, the station chatter was split down the middle. Biscuit projected the local net feeds onto the wall as Edwin finally began to stitch the wound on the woman's side. It was a jagged tear, likely from a pipe edge or a scraper drone. Alien saboteur creates crisis to infiltrate systems, read one headline. Miracle fix in Sector 9. Did the cat save us, read another. They do not know what to call you, Edwin said, tying off a suture with practiced hands. Do you have a name, or do I just call you the cat? The woman sat on the exam table, flinching slightly, as the biosealant stung her skin. She looked at the scrolling text, her expression unreadable. Sable, she said quietly. My name is Sable. Well, Sable, Edwin said, peeling off his gloves. You have your sanctuary for tonight, but you have made a powerful enemy. He gestured to the main window. Down the long, curved corridor of the promenade, standing silently amidst the flow of confused civilians, was Cassandra Pike. She wasn't storming the clinic again. She was just standing there, staring through the glass layers of the station, looking directly toward the clinic's location. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked hungry. She looked like a collector who had just discovered that a rare butterfly wasn't just beautiful, but could also be weaponized. Sable shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. She sees the machine inside me. She sees the use. Edwin stood beside her, blocking the line of sight with his own body. He felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. It wasn't the fear of the alien sitting on his table with her glowing eyes and sonic voice. It was the fear of his own kind. He feared what humanity would do to something this unique, this desperate, and this powerful. They wouldn't kill her. That would be too kind. They would dissect her piece by piece until they figured out how to make her purr for profit. She can look all she wants, Edwin said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. But this clinic is closed. He hit the control panel on the wall. The blast shutters slammed down over the window, cutting off Cassandra's gaze, sealing the two of them, and the drone in the safety of the artificial twilight. Get some sleep, Sable, Edwin said. Tomorrow we have to figure out how to keep you from becoming a science experiment. Sable curled her legs up, resting her chin on her knees. And the heirs, she asked, her voice faint, testing the waters one last time. Edwin looked at her, exhausted and aching, but smiling for the first time that night. Get some sleep, he repeated. That is a medical order. Sable closed her eyes. For the first time since crashing through his door, her breathing slowed. The ozone smell had faded, replaced by the scent of warm machinery and the quiet, steady rhythm of two hearts beating in the dark. The flickering light in the corridor of Sector 4 was not a malfunction. In a station like Asteria Hollow, where every joule of energy was accounted for by the central life support AI lights, did not flicker without a reason. A flicker meant a power surge, a rerouting of thermal conduits, or, as Dr. Edwin was beginning to suspect, something far more insidious, moving behind the bulkheads. It was 8 o'clock in the morning station time. The artificial sunrise had simulated a pale, watery dawn across the promenade screens, but inside the clinic, the mood was still stuck in the darkest hour of the night. Absolutely not, Rosa Cade said, slamming her heavy wrench onto the metal counter. The sound rang out like a gunshot, making the few caged recovery animals flinch. I do not care if she can talk to air filters, Edwin. She is undocumented. She is a biological variable I cannot account for. And looking at her, Rosa gestured vaguely at the corner where Sable sat perfectly still. She looks like she is waiting for a reason to snap someone's neck. Sable was perched on a high stool, her posture rigid. She had cleaned the dust from her fur, revealing a coat that shifted between charcoal and slate gray, depending on the angle of the light. She was wearing a spare set of medical scrubs that were too loose on her elongated frame, the sleeves rolled up to accommodate her forearms. "She is not a variable Rosa," Edwin said, pouring 2 cups of synthetic coffee. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline of the oxygen crisis had faded, leaving behind the ache in his joints that came with being 45 years old on a low-gravity frontier. "She is a necessity. You saw what she did to the sensor array. We are fighting a system failure that defies engineering logic. I need someone who can hear the logic we are missing." "You need a mechanic," Rosa argued, taking the coffee but eyeing Sable suspiciously. "Not a whatever she is. A whisperer." "I am a resonance technician," Sable said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried that strange, subvocal vibration that made the water in Edwin's cup ripple slightly. "In my hive before the exile, I tended to the engines of the colony ships. A machine is just a body made of metal. It has a pulse. It gets sick." Rosa narrowed her eyes. "Machines do not get sick. They break." "That is why you cannot fix the lull bloom," Sable replied calmly. "You are trying to repair a bone fracture when the patient has a fever." The door to the clinic slid open with a soft hiss. Naomi Wren walked in, looking like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Her lab coat was wrinkled, and she was clutching a data pad as if it were a holy scripture. "Tell me you have coffee," Naomi said, bypassing greetings entirely. "Synthetic blend tastes like burnt copper," Edwin said, handing her his own cup. "What is the verdict, Naomi?" Naomi took a long, desperate sip and grimaced. "It is bad, doctor. I ran the analysis on the moss samples from the ventilation shaft where you and our new guest went crawling." She glanced at Sable, offering a tired, apologetic smile. "The lull bloom is not acting like a fungus anymore. It is acting like a neural network." "Explain," Edwin said, leaning against the examination table. "Fungi grow randomly," Naomi explained, tapping her data pad to project a hologram into the center of the room. It showed a map of the station with red veins spreading through the lower levels. "They follow moisture and heat. But look at this pattern. The bloom is avoiding the heat exchangers. It is bypassing the waste recycling units. It is growing exclusively along the data transmission lines." "Is it tapping the wires?" Rosa asked, her skepticism warring with her concern. "It is insulating them," Naomi corrected. "It is wrapping around the communication nodes. It is not just blocking signals. It is modifying them. It is like the station is being rewired by a parasite that wants to control the nervous system." "Or test it," Sable murmured. Everyone turned to look at her. "Test it," Edwin asked. Sable hopped off the stool. Her movement was fluid, silent. She walked to the hologram and pointed a long, claw-tipped finger at the core of the station. "When a predator enters a new territory, it does not attack immediately," Sable said softly. "It tests the wind. It tests the water. It pushes the prey to see how they run. This bloom is squeezing the station to see what breaks first. It caused the oxygen failure to see how fast you would react. It is making the animals forget their paths to see if you can guide them." "That implies intelligence," Naomi whispered, her face pale. "We are talking about lichen, not a sentient being." "The lichen is just the finger," Sable said, her golden eyes darkening. "Something else is the hand." The silence that followed was heavy. Edwin felt a chill crawl up his spine. He looked at the red veins on the map, and for the first time, they didn't look like growth. They looked like a cage being built from the inside out. "Fine," Rosa broke the silence, picking up her wrench. "If we are being hunted by moss, I guess I can tolerate the Catwoman helping out. But Edwin, you are filing the paperwork. I am not going to be the one explaining to Harper Sato why we have an unregistered alien holding a scalpel." "She is not a surgeon," Edwin said, looking at Sable. "She is a specialized diagnostic consultant. I will sign her on as a temp. Under the Emergency Medical Provision Act, I can hire anyone if the station is in critical condition. Which it is, Naomi muttered. Good, Edwin said, clapping his hands together once trying to inject some energy into the room. Rosa, check the data lines in Sector 7. Naomi, keep analyzing that growth pattern. Sable, you are with me. We have rounds to make. The transition from intruder to assistant was not smooth. Sable moved through the clinic like a ghost. She was efficient, almost terrifyingly so. When Edwin needed a clamp, it was in his hand before he asked. When a recovery monitor beeped with a warning, she was there adjusting the leads before the nurse drone could even process the error. But she was also a creature of trauma. That night, after the clinic had closed to the public, Edwin stayed late to finish the inventory logs. He walked past the small recovery room he had set up for Sable, a cot in the back storage area, surrounded by boxes of sterile gauze. She was asleep, but she wasn't lying down. Sable was sitting upright in the corner of the cot, her back pressed firmly against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. Her eyes were squeezed shut, but her ears were twitching, swiveling toward every creak of the station's settling hull. Her hands were gripping her own ankles so tightly that her knuckles were white. It was the sleep of someone who expected to be attacked. It was the sleep of prey. Edwin watched her for a moment, his heart aching. He had seen that posture before in the soldiers he had treated during the border wars. The inability to expose one's vital organs, even in unconsciousness. Doctor, a mechanical voice buzzed by his ear. Edwin jumped, nearly dropping his datapad. Biscuit was hovering at eye level, its single red optical sensor glowing in the dark. Subject Sable is exhibiting signs of Stage 3 hypervigilance. Biscuit stated, its volume unhelpfully loud in the quiet room. Heart rate is elevated. Rapid eye movement suggests a nightmare scenario involving pursuit. I recommend the administration of a standard sedative. 50 milligrams of diazepam should induce a horizontal sleep posture. Sable's eyes snapped open. There was no transition between sleep and wakefulness. 1 second, she was asleep. The next, she was staring at Edwin, her pupils dilated, a low hiss building in her throat. Easy, Edwin said, raising his hands slowly. It is just me. And the drone. Nobody is here. Sable let out a breath, her shoulders sagging. She blinked, the golden glow of her eyes dimming as the panic receded. She looked at Biscuit, then at Edwin. Do you always drug your patients before asking their names? She asked, her voice raspy with sleep. Edwin chuckled softly, leaning against the doorframe. Only the ones who break my doors down, or the ones who try to bite the drone. I did not bite him, Sable said, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. Though he looks like he would crunch satisfyingly. Like a beetle. I am made of reinforced ceramic composite, Biscuit retorted indignantly. I would shatter your dental integrity. Go to recharge mode, Biscuit, Edwin ordered. The drone grumbled something about ungrateful biologicals and floated away. Edwin looked back at Sable. You do not have to sleep against the wall here, Sable. The magnetic locks on the outer door are military grade. Nothing gets in unless I let it in. It is not about the door, Sable said, resting her chin on her knees. It is about the vibration. If I lie down, I can feel the floor too much. The station sounds wrong tonight. The hum is off-key. The lull bloom. Deeper, she said. Down in the core. It sounds like hunger. Edwin frowned. He stepped into the room and sat on the edge of a crate, keeping a respectful distance. We are going to find out what it is. Naomi is good. Rosa is the best engineer I know. And you have ears that can hear ghosts in the machine. Sable looked at him, her expression guarded. Why? Why what? Why do you keep me? She asked. I fixed your air. The debt is paid. You could turn me into this Cassandra woman and receive a commendation. Or credits. Humans like credits. I am not much of a fan of credits, Edwin said, looking at his hands. And I am even less of a fan of people who treat living things like spare parts. You are not a part Sable. You are a person.
I am an exile, she corrected. And a failure. According to who? According to the mothers of my hive, she said bitterly. I was born with the hearing, but I refused the song. I did not want to be a keeper. I wanted to be something else. So they cast me out. They said a tool that refuses to work is scrap metal.
Edwin felt a sharp pang of empathy. Well, he said, standing up. My father wanted me to be a structural architect. He said fixing animals was a waste of a good brain. He told me I was building sandcastles while he was building skyscrapers. Sable tilted her head. What did you say to him? I told him that skyscrapers don't look back at you when you save them, Edwin replied. And then I left. Sometimes being scrap metal just means you haven't found the right machine to be part of yet. Sable watched him leave the room. For the first time, she uncurled her legs. She didn't lie down completely, but she leaned back against the pillow, her claws retracting into her fingers. The peace did not last 24 hours. The next afternoon, the clinic was swamped. It wasn't a viral outbreak and it wasn't an industrial accident. It was violence. Hold him down, Edwin shouted, struggling to keep a grip on a massive reptilian hauler lizard. The creature, usually docile enough to be led by a child, was thrashing wildly. It had snapped the reinforced leash and bitten its handler, a burly miner, who was currently sitting on the floor clutching a bleeding arm. He just went crazy, Doc. The miner yelled, his face pale with shock. 1 minute we were loading ore. The next minute he looked at me like he didn't know who I was. He looked at me like I was meat. Sedative, Edwin barked. Sable was there instantly, pressing the pneumatic injector into Edwin's hand. He jammed it into the lizard's flank. The creature hissed, its tail whipping around and knocking a tray of instruments to the floor with a deafening crash. But it didn't go down. The drug should have dropped an elephant in 10 seconds. The lizard's eyes were wide, the pupils blown out, vibrating with a manic energy. It is not working, Edwin realized. The adrenaline levels are too high. His brain is overriding the chemical block. The lizard lunged again, snapping its jaws inches from Edwin's face. Sable, Edwin shouted. The voice, do the thing. Sable didn't hesitate. She stepped in front of Edwin, placing herself directly in the path of the snapping jaws. She didn't scream. She didn't shout. She dropped to a crouch, making herself small, and opened her mouth. The sound that came out was different from the one she had used on the air sensor. That had been a mechanical counter-frequency. This was organic. It was a low, throbbing rumble, a sound that mimicked the purr of a mother predator calming her cubs. It was a sound of safety, but also of dominance. Thrum, thrum. The air in the room grew heavy. The glass on the medicine cabinets rattled. The lizard froze, its head cocked to the side. The frantic white-rimmed look in its eyes began to fade, replaced by a glazed confusion. Sable slowly reached out a hand, keeping the vibration steady in her throat. She touched the lizard's snout. The creature let out a long, shuddering sigh and slumped to the floor, finally allowing the sedative to take hold. The room was silent. The miner stared at Sable with open-mouthed horror. "What is she?" the miner whispered. "She just turned him off." "She is my assistant," Edwin said, firmly, checking the lizard's pulse. "And she just saved your other arm." "Doc," the miner said, standing up and backing away. "That ain't natural. My lizard didn't just get sick. He was scared. He was hearing something. And now she's doing it too." "Go to the infirmary for that bite, Miller," Edwin ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. As the miner fled, Edwin turned to Sable. She was rubbing her throat, looking drained. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Edwin asked quietly. "Before the lizard attacked." "Yes," Sable nodded. "A pulse, low frequency, coming from the floor plates. It was a command signal." "A command to attack?" "No," Sable said, her eyes troubled. "A command to purge. The signal told the animal that everything around it was a threat. It induced pure survival instinct. Fight or die. "Someone is turning the station's ecosystem against us," Edwin said grimly. "They are weaponizing fear." The answer, or at least the face of the problem, arrived an hour later on the public holoscreens. Cassandra Pike stood on a podium in the central plaza of Asteria Hollow. She looked impeccable, her white suit gleaming under the artificial sun. Behind her, the logo of Heliox Charter rotated slowly, a golden sun, with a stylized DNA helix in the center. "Citizens of Asteria," Cassandra's voice was projected into every corridor, every room, and every clinic. "We face a crisis. The lull bloom is not just affecting our machines. It is affecting our future. The fertility rates on this station have dropped by 80% in the last 6 months. We are facing extinction by attrition." Edwin watched the screen, his jaw tight. She wasn't lying about the numbers, but he knew what was coming next. "Heliox Charter is here to help," Cassandra continued, her smile benevolent. "We are initiating the Reproductive Compatibility Initiative. We have identified genetic markers that are resistant to the bloom's effects. We are offering specialized contracts to those who qualify. You will be housed in our secure biodomes. You will be provided with the best nutrition. You will be protected." "Protected," Edwin scoffed. "Imprisoned." "In exchange," Cassandra said, "any offspring produced under the initiative will be wards of the Charter until the age of 18. To ensure their safety, of course. We are securing the next generation." "She is buying babies," Sable whispered, standing beside him. "She is harvesting the future." The camera on the screen panned to the crowd. Some people looked angry, but many, too many, looked desperate. They were scared. They saw a savior in a white suit. "And," Cassandra added, her eyes seeming to look straight through the camera, "we must be vigilant against those who would pollute our gene pool. Unauthorized biologicals, exiles who carry unstable genetic sequences. They are not just a drain on resources. They are a contamination risk." The feed cut to a grainy image. It was a security capture from the night before. It was blurry, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It was Sable. "If you see this entity," Cassandra said, "do not approach. Report it to Heliox Security, for the safety of your children." Edwin turned off the screen. "She is smart," Edwin said. "She knows she can't just arrest you without causing a scene with the local authorities. So she is turning the people against you. She is making you the boogeyman." Sable didn't say anything. She walked over to the sink and began to scrub her hands. She scrubbed harder and harder until Edwin could smell the metallic tang of blood. "Sable, stop," Edwin said, grabbing her wrists. Her hands were trembling. Her claws had extended involuntarily, digging into her own palms. The water in the sink was swirling with pink. "I am a contamination," she hissed, her voice cracking. "That is what they called me on the homeworld. That is what she calls me here. Maybe it is true. Everywhere I go, systems break." "Systems break because they are built badly," Edwin said fiercely. "Not because of you." He pulled a sterile bandage from the dispenser. "Sit down." He cleaned her hands in silence. The wounds were shallow but numerous. "You asked me why I hate the phrase, 'it is what it is,'" Edwin said, his voice low. 10 years ago, I was part of a rescue op on the moon of Thetis. A mining collapse. We had 300 people trapped in a pocket of air. We had the ships. We had the drills. But the company calculated that the cost of the fuel to drill through the bedrock was higher than the payout for the miner's life insurance. Sable looked up at him, her eyes wide. "They ordered us to stand down," Edwin continued, wrapping the gauze around her hand. "They said it was a tragic inevitability. They said, it is what it is. I stood on the bridge of my ship and listened to 300 people suffocate over the radio because a spreadsheet said they weren't worth saving." He tied off the bandage. "I swore then," Edwin said, meeting her gaze, that I would never let math decide who lives and who dies. You are not a number, Sable. And you are certainly not a contamination. You are the only person on this station who is actually listening to the problem instead of trying to profit from it. Sable looked at her bandaged hands. Then she looked at Edwin. For the first time, the wariness in her eyes softened into something else. Trust. Or the beginning of it. "Then let us listen," she said softly. "The pulse that drove the lizard made me track it. But I need to be closer to the source. It is coming from the lower maintenance levels, but not the core." "Where?" "The warehouse district," Sable said. "Sector 12. The vibration is distinct. It sounds hollow." Sector 12 was a graveyard of shipping containers. It was where the long-haul freighters docked to offload supplies that weren't urgent enough for the main hangars. It was dark cold and smelled of stale grease. Edwin and Sable moved through the shadows. Edwin carried a heavy-duty flashlight and a stun baton standard issue for veterinarians in a rough sector. Sable carried nothing but her senses. "Here," she whispered, stopping in front of a massive crate marked with the Heliox Charter logo. It was stamped, "Humanitarian Aid, Medical Filters." "Charity," Edwin muttered. "Cassandra is generous." "It is humming," Sable said, pressing her ear to the metal. "Inside, a high-pitched whine, like a mosquito." Edwin used his multi-tool to bypass the electronic lock. The crate hissed open. Inside there were rows of industrial air filters, pristine and wrapped in plastic. They looked normal. "They look fine," Edwin said. "Look closer," Sable said. She reached in and tapped the mesh of one filter. "The weave. It is not synthetic fiber." Edwin shone his light closer. He magnified the image with his optical scanner. The mesh wasn't fiber. It was a dormant colony of nanites, millions of them interlocked to form a screen. "These aren't filters," Edwin realized with horror. "They are incubators. When the air passes through these, it doesn't get cleaned. It picks up the nanites and spreads them through the ventilation system." "This is the source of the bloom," Sable said. "She is not fighting the disease. She is planting it." "She infects the station," Edwin reasoned, his anger rising like bile. "Fertility drops. Animals go crazy. People get scared. Then she offers the cure, her compatibility initiative. She creates the problem so she can sell the solution." "And the solution is ownership," Sable finished. "Well, well," a smooth voice echoed from the darkness behind them. "I thought veterinarians were supposed to be smart, but you really lack a sense of self-preservation, Doctor." Floodlights slammed on, blinding them. Edwin shielded his eyes. Standing on the gantry above them was Cassandra Pike, flanked by 4 armed security drones. "You are trespassing on private corporate property," Cassandra said, leaning on the railing. "And you are tampering with vital medical supplies." "Medical supplies!" Edwin shouted, pointing at the crate. "This is a biological weapon, Cassandra. You are poisoning the whole station." "I am accelerating evolution," Cassandra replied calmly. "The Asteria station is failing, Edwin. The population is stagnant. The genetic diversity is crumbling. The lull bloom forces the weak to perish and the strong to adapt. I am just guiding the process, filtering out the noise." She looked at Sable. "Speaking of noise," Cassandra smiled. "I see you brought the stray. Perfect. My scientists are dying to know how her vocal cords can disrupt a nanite matrix. Vivisection is such an ugly word, but sometimes necessary for progress." The drones leveled their weapons. Sable stepped in front of Edwin. Her fur stood on end. A low, dangerous growl started in her chest, vibrating the metal floor plates. "You understand nothing of noise," Sable said, her voice dropping into that terrifying resonant register. "You think silence is an order, but silence is just death." "Take them," Cassandra ordered. "Run," Edwin yelled. He didn't wait for Sable to argue. He grabbed a canister of pressurized coolant from the shelf next to him and threw it not at the drones, but at the open crate of nanite filters. Bang! The canister ruptured. A cloud of supercooled gas exploded outward, freezing the nanites instantly. The sudden thermal shock caused the filters to shatter like glass. The sound was deafening. The drones paused their sensors, blinded by the thermal bloom. Edwin grabbed Sable's hand. "Go now." They sprinted into the maze of containers. Laser fire sizzled through the air, scorching the metal where they had just been standing. "She will hunt us now," Sable shouted as they scrambled over a pile of scrap. "Truly hunt us." "She was always hunting us," Edwin yelled back, his lungs burning. "Now we just know why." They reached a service lift. Edwin jammed the override key. The doors groaned open. They dived inside just as a drone rounded the corner. A laser bolt hit the closing door, welding a black scar across the metal. As the lift began to ascend, carrying them away from the warehouse, Edwin leaned against the wall, gasping for air. Sable was shaking. "She called it evolution. She thinks she is a god." Edwin looked at her. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the defiance. She hadn't run away from him. She had stood in front of him. "She is not a god," Edwin said, wiping soot from his face. "She is a breeder, and she just made the mistake of cornering a doctor who knows how to deal with an infection." The lift dinged. They were back on the main level safe for the moment, but the war had officially started. Edwin looked at Sable. "We can't go back to the clinic. She will have a team there in 10 minutes. "Where do we go?" Sable asked. "Down," Edwin said. "You said the pulse was coming from the core, the deep core." "Yes." "Then we go to the one place Cassandra hasn't corrupted yet," Edwin said. "We go to the bottom, to the silence." He paused, then looked at her with a grim intensity. "You said you could give me heirs," Edwin said. "Cassandra thinks she can buy them. She thinks biology is just a transaction." Sable looked away, shame coloring her expression. "I told you I was desperate. It was a foolish thing to say." "No," Edwin said, stepping closer. He reached out and gently lifted her chin so she had to look at him. "It wasn't foolish. It was honest. But Cassandra looks at you and sees a test subject. She looks at me and sees an obstacle. She looks at these people and sees livestock." His voice hardened cold as the void outside. "She told me I understand breeding," Edwin said. "I told her I understand care, but she forgot the other thing veterinarians do." "What is that?" Sable asked. "We put down rabid animals," Edwin said, "and she is foaming at the mouth." The beast was weeping, but only Sable could hear it. They were huddled in a decommissioned maintenance bay on level 14, a sector of Asteria Hollow that had been temporarily closed for renovation for 20 years. The air here was stale, smelling of old coolant and rust, but it was off the grid. Harper Sato had provided the access codes, a silent act of rebellion from the man who supposedly valued order above all else. On the makeshift table, a crate covered in a sterile thermal blanket, lay a juvenile rift strider. It was a reptilian creature usually employed for hauling heavy cables through narrow conduits. Now it was curled into a tight ball, its scales dull and gray. Its throat was vibrating rapidly, a blur of motion that produced no audible sound to human ears. "Heart rate is 120, Dr. Edwin said, reading the bioscanner. He looked exhausted. The chase from the warehouse had left bruises under his eyes and a layer of grime on his white coat. "Physiologically, he is stable, but his cortisol levels suggest he is in the middle of a predator attack. He is terrified." "He is not terrified," Sable said. She was standing by the animal's head, her hand resting gently on its snout. Her eyes were closed, her ears swiveled forward. "He is lonely," Edwin frowned, adjusting the scanner settings. "Lonely, Sable, this species is solitary by nature. They only gather for mating cycles which are 2 years away." "Listen to the frequency," Sable whispered. "He is broadcasting at 40,000 hertz. It is a distress call, but not for help. It is a location ping. He is saying, 'I am here. Where are you? Edwin looked at the trembling creature. Who is he calling? The pack, Sable said, opening her eyes. They glowed with a soft, mournful luminescence in the dim light. But Rift Striders do not have packs. That is the point. The lull bloom is not just confusing their navigation. It is rewriting their instincts. It is making them believe they belong to a collective that does not exist. Edwin lowered the scanner. He looked at the map of the station projected on the wall, the red veins of the bloom that Naomi Wren had identified. A collective, Edwin murmured. Or a destination. He walked over to the map. Naomi said the bloom is growing along the data lines insulating them, modifying the signals. What if it isn't blocking communication? What if it is trying to route everything animals, data people, to a specific point? A summons, Sable said. Exactly, a summons. Edwin traced a line through the chaotic red web. Look at the density. The infection is thickest in the upper levels, causing the air failures. It is thickest in the residential rings, causing the fertility drop. But as you go deeper, the red lines straighten out. They stop branching. They become highways. He tapped a dark spot at the very bottom of the hologram. It was labeled simply, Structural Foundation. Do not enter. The infection isn't growing up, Edwin realized, a cold chill settling in his stomach. It is growing down. It is trying to pull us to the core. The heavy blast door of the bay groaned. Edwin grabbed a heavy wrench, his knuckles turning white. Sable hissed, her claws extending instantly. The door slid open just enough to admit a tall figure in a gray tactical uniform. Harper Sato slipped inside and immediately engaged the locking mechanism behind him. He looked like a man walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Put the wrench down, Doctor, Harper said, his voice dry. If I wanted to arrest you, I would have brought a squad, not a sandwich. He tossed a foil-wrapped package onto a crate. Harper, Edwin breathed, lowering the weapon. Is the station secure? The station is a powder keg, Harper replied, pulling a data chip from his pocket. Cassandra Pike has doubled her private security detail. She is claiming that terrorists, that means you two, sabotage the medical supplies. She has the population scared, Edwin. People are locking their doors, and when people are scared, they stop asking questions. We need to get to the core, Edwin said, ignoring the food. The lull bloom originates there. We think it is a signal. Harper looked at the map, then at the suffering Rift Strider. I checked the blueprints you asked for. The archives say the foundation is just solid rock and stabilization thrusters. But the energy readings say otherwise. There is a power draw down there, massive, equivalent to 3 main reactors. 3 reactors? Edwin asked, stunned. Hidden under the floorboards. And there is this, Harper said, slotting the chip into the projector. The hologram flickered and changed. It showed a schematic of the station's original construction, dated over 100 years ago. But overlaid on the blueprints were handwritten notes in a script Edwin didn't recognize. My grandfather was one of the original excavators, Harper said quietly. He left this in his physical journals. He said they didn't carve Asteria Hollow out of the rock. He said they found it. They built the station around a cavity that was already there. Sable stepped forward, her eyes locked on the schematic. It is a shell, she whispered, like a hermit crab finding a new home. Cassandra knows, Edwin said. That is why she wants the station. It isn't about the mining rights. It is about what is inside the rock. Harper handed Edwin a heavy magnetic keycard. It was old, the plastic yellowed with age. This overrides the service elevators in Sector 0. It will get you past the civilized levels. After that, you are on your own. There are no cameras down there, no sensors, just rock. Why are you doing this, Harper? Edwin asked. If Cassandra finds out, Harper looked at the Rift Strider, which had finally stopped shaking under Sable's touch. My wife and I have been trying for a baby for 5 years, Harper said, his voice devoid of emotion, though his eyes betrayed a deep, quiet grief. Last week we got the letter from Heliox. We were rejected for the program. Genetic incompatibility, they said. But I know my biology, Edwin. We are fine. The station is doing this to us. He looked at Cassandra's face on a nearby propaganda poster. I don't like people who steal my future and try to sell it back to me, Harper said. Go, before I change my mind. The descent into Sector 0 was not like taking an elevator. It felt like being swallowed. The service lift rattled and groaned as it passed the industrial levels. The air grew colder, heavier. The familiar smell of recycled ozone and antiseptic faded, replaced by something earthy and metallic, the smell of wet copper and deep, ancient soil. Depth is 3,000 meters below the central promenade, Biscuit announced from Edwin's pocket. The drone's voice was quieter than usual, as if even the AI sensed the weight of the stone pressing in on them. External pressure is an error. Sensors cannot calibrate. Why error? Edwin asked, checking his own flashlight. The walls, Sable said. The lift screeched to a halt. The doors opened onto darkness. Edwin stepped out, his beam cutting through the gloom. They were in a tunnel, but it wasn't the smooth, prefabricated durasteel of the upper station. The walls here were ribbed. Huge arching structures curved up from the floor to the ceiling, spaced at regular intervals. They looked like support beams, but the metal was pitted and porous. Wires and conduits didn't run through trays. They wove in and out of the beams, like vines or veins, Edwin whispered. He reached out to touch a thick cable that pulsed with a faint blue light. It felt warm. Not warm like an overheating engine, but warm like a living body. The transition is complete down here, Sable said. Her voice was trembling. She walked with her arms wrapped around herself, her ears flattened. The machine and the biology are not separate. They have grown together. They walked deeper. The architecture became increasingly disturbing. Floors were not flat metal plates, but layered tessellated scales that dampened the sound of their boots. The air hummed a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in the marrow of Edwin's bones. Sable stopped abruptly, near a junction where the tunnel widened into a vast, cavernous hall. The walls here were covered in a translucent, bioluminescent moss, the lull bloom in its purest form. It wasn't the angry red of the infection upstairs. Here it was a calm, rhythmic blue. She reached out her hand, hovering over a patch of the wall, where the metal looked almost like skin. Do not touch it, Edwin warned, reaching for her. I have to, she whispered. It is loud. It is screaming history. Her fingertips brushed the surface. Sable gasped, her back arching, as if she had been struck by lightning. Her knees buckled. Edwin caught her before she hit the floor. Sable, breathe. Her eyes were wide open, seeing nothing of the dark tunnel. The vision hit her, like a physical blow. She was not in a dark tunnel. She was in a nursery. But it was vast, the size of a city. The air was filled with golden dust. Above her, massive crystalline structures sang a song of growth, of shaping. She saw beings that were not human, not Felidari, but tall, multi-limbed shapers, who wove metal like silk. She felt a profound sense of safety, a promise. We sleep, so you may grow. Wake us when the stars represent danger. Sable. She snapped back to reality, gasping, clutching Edwin's lapels. Her heart was hammering against his chest. I saw them, she stammered. The builders. This isn't a mine. It isn't a station. It is a garden, a seed bank. She looked at the walls with terrified awe. They didn't build this place to house people. They built it to preserve life. The station is a lifeboat. Edwin looked at the wall. Under the light of his torch, the metal surface seemed to ripple slightly, expanding and contracting. If the wall starts breathing, Edwin whispered, trying to keep his voice steady, I am going to respectfully resign and go back to treating constipation in space hamsters. Sable let out a shaky, hysterical laugh. She pushed herself up, still leaning on him. The wall is breathing, Edwin. You are just finally learning how to look. Great, Edwin muttered. I will add respiratory architecture to the list of things I need to drink to forget. We are close, Sable said, pointing down the hall. The heartbeat. It is right there. They moved forward, stepping through a massive circular aperture that looked less like a door and more like a valve. And there it was, the cradle engine. It occupied a spherical chamber that must have been 2 kilometers wide. Suspended in the center of the void, held in place by thousands of organic metal tendrils, was a structure that defied geometry. It was a constantly shifting sphere of liquid chrome and light. It didn't spin. It flowed. It pulsed with a rhythm, thump, 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 that matched exactly the tempo of a resting human heart. Biscuit, Edwin said, his voice barely audible. Record this. Recording, Biscuit whispered. Though I calculate a 99% probability that no one will believe this footage is unedited. Naomi, Edwin tapped his comms link. Are you seeing this? Naomi's voice came through static-filled, but clear. She was safe in her lab, monitoring their feed. I see it, Edwin. The energy signature is off the charts. And look at the readings I am getting from the Lowell Bloom samples up here. They are reacting to that thing. They are syncing. What is it doing? Edwin asked, walking to the edge of the platform. It is a regulator, Naomi said, her voice trembling with scientific excitement. Edwin, the Lowell Bloom isn't a disease. It is an immune response. The cradle engine detected that the population on the station was stressed, unhappy, disconnected. So it decided to make us infertile, Edwin asked angrily. That is a hell of a way to help. No, Sable interrupted. She was staring at the engine, mesmerized. It stopped the reproduction because it thought the environment was unsafe for the young. It is the same logic a mother wolf uses in a famine. You do not bring pups into a world that cannot feed them. The engine thinks the station is dying, so it paused the life cycle to prevent suffering. It is trying to save us from ourselves, Edwin realized. It sensed the overcrowding, the poor air, the stress, and it hit the pause button. But it needs a command to start again, Naomi added. It is waiting for an operator, someone to tell it that the danger has passed, someone to synchronize with it. Synchronization, a cold voice echoed through the chamber. The holy grail of bioengineering. Edwin spun around. Emerging from the shadows of the entry valve was Cassandra Pike. She wasn't wearing her pristine white suit this time. She was in full tactical armor, flanked by 6 heavy combat drones and a team of engineers carrying equipment that looked disturbingly like surgical tools for a giant. You really are persistent, Doctor, Cassandra said, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. I have to applaud you. You found the heart of the prize before I could drill through the casing. How did you find us? Edwin demanded, stepping in front of Sable. You are carrying a drone, Cassandra pointed at Biscuit. Civilian encryption is so quaint. We have been watching your feed since you left the warehouse. She gestured to the engine. Look at it, Cassandra said, hunger naked in her eyes. A terraforming engine capable of biological regulation. Do you have any idea what this is worth? We don't just control the station. We can control the evolution of any colony we plant this on. We can breed workers who don't get tired. Soldiers who don't feel fear. It is a lifeboat, Sable snarled, her tail lashing. Not a factory. It is a tool, Cassandra corrected. And tools need users, she snapped her fingers. Secure the area. Contain the alien. I want her hooked up to the interface node immediately. If she can talk to air filters, let's see if she can talk to a god. The drones advanced their weapons, charging with a high-pitched whine. Sable, get behind me, Edwin said. There is nowhere to go, Edwin, Sable said, her voice tight. They have the high ground. Edwin looked at the drones. They were Heliox models, fast, lethal, and heavily shielded against ballistic weapons. But they relied on complex sensor arrays to target. He looked at the bag Harper had given him. It wasn't just food. Harper had slipped something else in. A piece of veterinary equipment Edwin had requested days ago for a large animal procedure. A mag pulse calmer. It was designed to emit a localized magnetic field to disrupt the equilibrium of a charging dredge ox, making the animal dizzy, so it would lie down. "Biscuit," Edwin muttered. "Can you override the safety limit on the calmer?" "Doctor," Biscuit warned. "Overriding the safety limit will turn that device into an electromagnetic grenade. It will fry my circuits. It will fry your flashlight. It might fry your pacemaker if you had one." "Do it," Edwin ordered. "It has been an honor serving you," Biscuit said. "Override complete in 3-2. Cassandra's soldiers were 10 meters away. "Grab the cat," the lead soldier shouted. "1." Edwin pulled the device from his pocket and smashed the activation stud against the railing. He threw it into the center of the approaching squad. Zoom. There was no explosion, just a sudden violent distortion of the air. A wave of magnetic distortion rippled out invisible, but felt in the teeth. The lights on the combat drones turned from red to a dead black. They spasmed, their gyroscopes failing, and crashed to the floor like marionettes with cut strings. The soldiers' HUDs went dark. Their comms screeched with static. "My eyes," one soldier yelled, ripping off his tactical helmet as the display shorted out. "Run!" Edwin grabbed Sable's hand. They sprinted along the catwalk, weaving through the confused soldiers who were firing blindly into the dark. "The interface," Sable shouted, pointing to a small control pedestal near the base of the cradle engine. "I have to touch it. I have to tell it to stop the bloom." "No time," Edwin yelled, pulling her away as a stray laser bolt slagged the railing inches from his hip. "Cassandra has backups. We need to regroup." They reached a maintenance chute, a gravity slide designed for debris. Edwin shoved Sable in and jumped after her. They slid down into the darkness, tumbling through the twisted intestines of the station, leaving the chaos of the chamber behind. They landed in a pile of soft, synthetic foam in a waste sorting room on a lower sublevel. It was quiet here, save for the distant hum of the engine above them. Edwin groaned, rolling onto his back. Every inch of his body ached. He checked his pocket. Biscuit was dead, a lifeless ball of ceramic. He felt a pang of loss for the annoying machine. Sable was sitting up, pulling foam from her fur. She wasn't hurt, but she was shaking with a rage that terrified him. "We were there," she hissed, slamming her fist into the foam. "I was right there. I could have ended it." "Why did you pull me away?" "Because you would have been shot," Edwin snapped, sitting up. "Cassandra doesn't care if you are the key. If she can't control you, she will dissect you to see how you work. You are not expendable, Sable." "Yes, I am," Sable screamed. The sound echoed in the small room, raw and broken. She scrambled to her feet, looming over him. "Look at me, Edwin, I am an exile. My own people threw me away because I wouldn't be a vessel for their songs. Now humans want to use me as a vessel for their machine. Everyone looks at me and sees a thing to be filled or used. A key, a womb, a tool." Tears thick and silver welled in her eyes. "I am tired of being defined by what I can produce," she cried. "I just wanted to be me. Just Sable. But Sable isn't enough to save anyone, is she?" Edwin stood up. He ignored the dirt on his clothes, the burn on his hip. He stepped close to her, invading her space, forcing her to look up at him. "Stop it," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Why, it is the truth. You only kept me because I could fix your air filters, because I could calm the lizards." "I kept you because I was lonely," Edwin roared. The confession hung in the air, sudden and heavy. Sable froze her mouth slightly open. Edwin breathed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. "I am surrounded by people every day, thousands of them, and I have never felt more isolated. I fix their pets, I sign their forms, I go home to an empty room and talk to a drone." He looked at her, his expression stripping away the professional mask he had worn for 20 years. "When you crashed into my clinic," Edwin said, his voice breaking, "I didn't see an alien. I saw someone who was fighting just as hard as I was to keep their head above water. You are not a tool to me, Sable. You are the first person in a decade who made me feel like I wasn't just a mechanic for meat. He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. He didn't touch her. He waited. Sable looked at his hand. Then slowly, she leaned into it, pressing her cheek against his palm. The contact was electric. Her skin was warm, the fur soft against his callus. "I am scared, Edwin," she whispered. "The engine is calling me. It knows what I am. It wants me to take the burden." "We will figure it out," Edwin said, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Together. You don't have to be a savior. You just have to be here." The distance between them vanished. Edwin leaned down. Sable tilted her head up. Her eyes were not glowing with the eerie light of the vision anymore. They were just eyes. Golden, vulnerable, and wanting. Their lips were an inch apart. Edwin could feel the warmth of her breath smelling faintly of ozone and something sweet like cinnamon. "Wow!" The sound didn't come from the speakers. It came from inside their heads. It was a psychic shriek, a wave of pure, unadulterated white noise that blasted through the station. Edwin stumbled back, clutching his head. What is that?" Sable fell to her knees, screaming silently, her hands over her ears. "The bloom," she gasped. "It is shifting phase." Cassandra, she must have tried to force the interface. She triggered the defense mechanism. "Defense mechanism?" Edwin yelled over the ringing in his ears. "It is wiping the slate," Sable cried. "Memory, it is attacking memory." Edwin blinked. The room seemed to tilt. For a second, he forgot why he was standing there. He looked at the wall and wondered why it was gray. "Focus," he told himself. "My name is Edwin. I am a vet." But the thought was slippery. It was like trying to hold water in his hands. "My name is Edward Ed." He looked at the woman on the floor. She was beautiful, alien, cat-like. Who was she? Patient number friend Moore. "Sable," he shouted the name anchoring him. Sable looked up. Her eyes were swimming with confusion. "Doctor, we have to go." Edwin grabbed her arm, hauling her up. "If we stay here, we will forget everything. We need shielding." "The clinic." "Clinic." Sable repeated the word, sounding foreign on her tongue. "Safe place." "Yes," Edwin said, dragging her toward the door. "Safe place. Run." They stumbled out into the corridor, two people fighting to hold onto their own names as the station around them began to dissolve into a fog of forgetting. The lull bloom had stopped asking for a pilot. Now, it was screaming for silence. The public screens along the promenade were usually reserved for weather updates and mining quotas. Today, they were burning with the face of Cassandra Pike. The image was high-definition crisp enough to show the terrifying sincerity in her eyes. She did not look like a corporate warlord. She looked like a concerned mother. "Citizens of Asteria Hollow," Cassandra's voice echoed through the corridors, bouncing off the steel bulkheads. "We are in the grip of a biological attack. The memory lapses you experienced yesterday, the seizures. They are not a glitch. They are a symptom of contamination." Edwin watched from the shadows of a ventilation grate in Sector 4. Beside him, Sable was pressed flat against the floor, her ears swiveled back, trembling, with a mixture of rage and fear. "The Felidari exile known as Sable," Cassandra continued, and Sable's image, a distorted, menacing security capture, replaced her face on the screen. "She carries a pathogen that destabilizes our neural interfaces. Heliox Charter has developed a stabilizing agent. We have the cure, but we cannot distribute it while the carrier is active. Bring her to the central bridge. Do this and the medical bays will open within 1 hour." The reaction in the corridor was immediate. Edwin saw a group of miners' men he had shared drinks with look at each other. He saw a mother clutch her child tighter, her eyes darting around with suspicion. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to a sharp, weaponized panic. "She is good," Edwin whispered, his voice grim. She just turned 3,000 neighbors into bounty hunters.
I should go,
Sable hissed. She started to rise, but Edwin slammed a hand onto her shoulder, pinning her down. Do not be an idiot, Edwin snapped. There is no cure. She is holding the station hostage to get you.
People are afraid, Doctor.
Sable argued, her golden eyes flashing in the gloom. Fear makes people do ugly things. If I surrender, the hunt stops. If you surrender, you become a lab rat and the station stays under her thumb forever, Edwin retorted. We need to move. The clinic is compromised. We need a secure location to regroup. I know a place, a gruff voice spoke from the darkness behind them. Edwin spun around his stun baton, extending with a crackle of electricity. Standing in the shadows of the service tunnel, holding a heavy wrench like a baseball bat, was Rosa Cade. The chief engineer looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her coveralls were stained with grease and her face was a mask of thunder. Rosa, Edwin breathed, not lowering the weapon. If you are here to collect the reward. Put that toy away, Edwin, Rosa spat, stepping into the dim light. I am insulted. Do you think I would sell out a friend for a corporate coupon? She pulled a data pad from her belt and shoved it into Edwin's chest. I pulled the logs from the Heliox humanitarian crates, Rosa said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. You were right. The filters aren't cleaning the air. They are doping it. They are releasing a mild neuroinhibitor. It makes people docile, suggestible, and it suppresses the immune system just enough to make the Lol Bloom infection worse. Edwin looked at the data streams. She is poisoning the well so she can sell bottled water. I built this station's life support with my own hands, Rosa growled. I know every bolt, every weld. I will not let some corporate suit turn my home into a gas chamber. Come on, Harper cleared the old triage center in Sector 8. It is off the grid. The triage center was a relic from the mining wars, a bunker reinforced with lead and concrete. It smelled of old dust and stale adrenaline, but it was safe. Naomi Wren was already there, surrounded by a chaotic nest of wires and servers she had salvaged. Harper Sato stood by the door, checking the magazine of a kinetic rifle. When Edwin and Sable walked in, the tension in the room was palpable. But it wasn't the hostility of the mob outside. It was the focus of a surgical team before a difficult operation. Status, Edwin said, slipping back into the role of the triage commander. Bad, Naomi said, not looking up from her screens. The cradle engine is waking up. The pulse we felt yesterday, the memory wipe, was just a yawn. It is building up to a scream. I am reading energy spikes in the terawatt range. If it releases another pulse at that intensity, it will fry every neural implant on the station, Rosa finished. We will all be lobotomized. The animals know, Sable said softly. She walked to the center of the room. She didn't look at the screens. She looked at the floor. Can you hear them? She asked. Suddenly the floor vibrated. It was a rhythmic thumping growing louder by the second. What is that? Harper asked, raising his rifle. Stampede, Edwin realized. The beasts of burden. The dredge oxen. The hauler lizards. They are moving to the core, Sable said, her voice distant, as if she were translating a language only she could hear. The engine is calling them. It wants to protect them. It is telling them to come home. If 200 tons of livestock rush the structural supports of the core, they will knock the gyroscope out of alignment, Edwin said, his face paling. The station will tumble into the gas giant's gravity well. We have maybe 2 hours before orbit decay becomes irreversible. We have to stop the engine, Harper said. No, Edwin corrected. We have to stop Cassandra from provoking it. The engine is reacting to her. It senses an intruder, so it is calling for help. If we remove the threat, the engine sleeps. And how do we remove a woman who has a private army and the loyalty of the mob? Rosa asked, crossing her arms. We bait her, Edwin said. He looked at Sable. She wants a key. We give her one. He turned to Naomi. Can you synthesize a biosignal? Something that mimics Sable's resonance frequency. Naomi chewed her lip. I can record Sable's purr and loop it through a high-gain emitter. It won't fool the engine, but it might fool Cassandra's scanners for a few minutes. It will look like Sable is trying to interface with a remote node. Where do we set the trap? Harper asked. The glass bridge, Edwin said. It is the only access point to the core that is narrow enough to bottleneck her forces. And it is fragile. If things go wrong, we can blow the supports and cut off the path to the engine entirely. That is a suicide mission, a mechanical voice chirped. Biscuit. The drone had been sitting on a shelf undergoing a self-repair cycle. It floated up now, its ceramic casing scorched black from the grenade blast in the previous encounter. I have calculated the survival probability of a direct confrontation on the glass bridge, Biscuit announced. It is approximately 3%. Margin of error, 1%. Thank you for the optimism, Biscuit, Edwin said dryly. The drone is like you, Sable murmured, standing next to Edwin. A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes were sad. Useful. But he makes you want to throw him out of an airlock. I heard that, Biscuit buzzed. Focus, Edwin said. Harper, I need you to organize an evacuation route for the civilians in the lower ring. If the station tilts, that sector goes dark first. Use the clinic as a staging ground. Rosa, help him with the airlocks. And you? Rosa asked. Sable and I are going shopping, Edwin said, his eyes hard. Before we go to the bridge, we need to visit the Heliox warehouse one last time. There is something there I need to confirm. The infiltration of the Heliox secure facility was less of a heist and more of a ghost story. The sector was deserted. The workers had all been pulled to the upper levels to join the hunt for the alien. The silence in the warehouse was oppressive, broken only by the hum of cooling units. They found the lab in the back. It wasn't a clean white scientific facility. It was an industrial meat locker. In the center of the room stood a device that made Edwin's stomach turn. It looked like a medical chair, but modified with heavy restraints and a terrifying array of neural probes. That is not for therapy, Edwin whispered, shining his light on the headrest. Look at the cranial spikes. This is an extraction rig. Sable walked around the chair. She ran a hand over the cold metal. She didn't shiver. She looked resigned. It strips the will, she said quietly. It isolates the part of the brain that controls the resonance my voice and separates it from the conscious mind. She doesn't want me to sing for the engine. She wants to cut the song out of me and play it like a recording. She wants a battery, Edwin said, disgust curling his lip. She wants to bypass the person and just use the biology. He looked at Sable. She was standing in the shadows of the machine that was built to unmake her. Sable, Edwin said. Back at the clinic you said something. You said you could give me heirs. Sable stiffened. She looked away. I told you. I was desperate. I was trying to buy my life. No, Edwin said, stepping closer. You meant something else. I have been thinking about the Felidari culture. You aren't a species that trades in children. You trade in legacy. Sable turned to him. Her expression was guarded, vulnerable. In my hive, she said softly, an heir is not a child you raise. An heir is the one who carries the song when your throat is too tired to sing. It is a transfer of burden. The cradle engine requires a keeper, someone to listen to it constantly, someone to regulate the ecosystem, to tell the moss when to bloom and the water when to cycle. She looked at the terrifying chair. It is a life sentence, Doctor. Once you bond with the engine, you never leave the core. You become the station's heart. You cease to be an individual. You become the place. She took a breath, her voice trembling. When I said I could give you heirs, I meant I would take that burden for this station. I would become the ghost in the machine so your people could live. I offered to erase myself for you. Edwin felt like he had been punched. He had thought she was offering a family. She had been offering a sacrifice. She had been willing to chain herself to a dark subterranean god for eternity, just to secure a safe harbor for a single night.
Why?
Edwin asked, his voice hoarse.
Why would you do that for strangers who hate you?
Because that is what I was bred for, Sable whispered.
Even if I was exiled, I cannot stop being what I am. I am a keeper who has no garden. It hurts to hear the engine cry and not answer.
Edwin reached out and grabbed her shoulders. He gripped her hard, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me, he said fiercely. You are not going into that machine, and you are not going to chain yourself to the core unless it is your choice. Your absolute free choice. There is no choice, Edwin, Sable cried, tears spilling over. Look at the numbers. If the engine isn't calm, the station dies. If Cassandra wins, she enslaves everyone. The only way to stop it is for me to give the engine what it wants. There is another way, Edwin said. We fight. We expose Cassandra. We make the station see the truth. And if we fail, then we fail as people, Edwin said. Not as products. He released her, his eyes blazing.
I have spent my whole life fixing things that people broke, Edwin said. I fix dogs used for fighting. I fix oxen worked to death. I am done with fixing the damage caused by greed. Today we break the machine. He pointed to the extraction chair.
Biscuit. Overload the power couplings on this thing. Melt it. With pleasure, Biscuit chirped, initiating thermal runaway. As the chair began to spark and smoke, Edwin turned to Sable. We are going to the bridge, he said. We are going to lure Cassandra out, and we are going to show everyone exactly who the monster is. Sable looked at the burning chair, then at Edwin. The fear in her eyes began to recede, replaced by something steelier. She wiped her face. You are a stubborn human, she said.
Occupational hazard, Edwin replied.
The glass bridge was a masterpiece of vanity, built by the original founders of Asteria Hollow to showcase the triumph over the void. It was a translucent walkway, spanning the central chasm of the station's interior. Below the glass, there was nothing but a 2-kilometer drop into the grinding machinery of the atmospheric processors. Above, the vaulted ceiling of the station glittered with artificial stars. It was beautiful. And it was a death trap. Cassandra Pike stood in the center of the bridge, flanked by her elite guard. She looked impatient.
Where are they?
She snapped into her comms. The signal pinged right here.
I am here,
a voice echoed from the far end of the walkway. Cassandra turned. Edwin stood alone at the entrance of the bridge. He was wearing his stained lab coat, his hands empty and raised in the air. Doctor, Cassandra smiled, smoothing her suit. I assume you have come to your senses. Where is the specimen? She is not a specimen, Edwin said, his voice carrying clearly over the chasm. And she is not coming. Disappointing, Cassandra sighed. Kill him. Wait, Edwin shouted. You want the key? I have it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic cylinder, the emitter Naomi had built. He pressed a button. A low, resonant purr vibrated through the air. It wasn't the real thing, but to the sensors on Cassandra's datapad, it looked like a biological match. I took a sample, Edwin lied smoothly. A neural recording. It is all here. The frequency, the modulation. Everything you need to talk to the engine. Cassandra's eyes widened. She gestured for her guards to hold their fire. Bring it to me, she ordered. No, Edwin said. You come get it, alone. Cassandra laughed. You are in no position to negotiate, Doctor. I am holding a thermal detonator next to the only copy of the key, Edwin said, holding up a second device, actually just a flare. If your guards take one step, I drop it. The recording melts, and you lose your prize forever. Cassandra studied him. She saw the desperation, the sweat, the shaking hand. She believed him. Stand down, she ordered her guards. She began to walk across the glass. Her heels clicked sharply on the transparent surface. You are a sentimental fool, Edwin, Cassandra said as she approached. You think you are saving her. You are just delaying the inevitable. The universe belongs to those who are willing to seize it. The universe belongs to those who live in it, Edwin corrected. A quaint philosophy, Cassandra sneered. She was 5 meters away now. Now give me the cylinder. Cassandra! The shout came from above. Sable dropped from the maintenance scaffolding overhead. She didn't land on the bridge. She landed on the sheer wall of the chasm, digging her claws into the metal plating, hanging suspended over the void. Do not give it to her, Sable screamed. Cassandra spun around looking up. There she is. It is a trap, Cassandra yelled to her guards. Open fire. Laser bolts erupted from the far end of the bridge, sizzling through the air. Edwin threw himself flat on the glass as the railing exploded above his head. Sable, move! Edwin shouted. Sable scrambled along the wall, moving with impossible speed. She wasn't running away. She was flanking them. Cassandra pulled a pistol from her coat. She didn't aim at Edwin. She aimed at Sable. If I can't have the whole cat, Cassandra snarled, I will take the pieces, bang! The shot went wide, sparking off the wall. Suddenly the bridge shook. It wasn't a bomb. It was the station. Wham! The cradle engine pulsed again. This time, it was violent. The lights on the bridge exploded. The artificial gravity fluctuated, causing everyone to float for a terrifying second, before slamming back down. From the tunnels behind the bridge, a roar erupted. The stampede, Edwin realized. They are here, a herd of dredge oxen, their eyes glowing with the blue light of the bloom, burst onto the observation deck, leading to the bridge. They were blind to the people, blind to the danger. They only saw the path to the core. Cassandra's guards turned screaming as the wall of muscle and horn plowed into them. Hold the line, Cassandra shrieked, firing wildly into the mass of beasts. But you couldn't stop a stampede with pistols. The guards were scattered like bowling pins. The vibration of the heavy animals hitting the deck transferred to the glass bridge. A spiderweb crack appeared beneath Cassandra's feet. Edwin scrambled up. Cassandra, get off the glass! It is going to shatter. I am not leaving without the key, she screamed, her face twisted in madness. She lunged at Edwin, grabbing for the cylinder in his hand. They grappled on the cracking glass. Cassandra was stronger than she looked, fueled by adrenaline and rage. She kneed Edwin in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. The cylinder skittered across the floor. Mine, Cassandra gasped, diving for it. No, Sable leapt from the wall. She hit the bridge with a heavy impact, landing between Cassandra and the device. The glass groaned. The crack expanded, shooting out under Sable's paws. Cassandra froze. She looked at Sable, then at the drop below. You won't do it, Cassandra hissed. If you break the glass, you fall too. Sable stood tall. Her fur was matted, her scrubs torn, but her eyes were burning with a golden fire. I can climb, Sable growled. Can you? She raised her foot and stomped down hard on the fracture point. Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap. The section of the bridge beneath them disintegrated. Edwin threw himself backward, catching the edge of a stable beam. Cassandra screamed as the floor vanished. She scrambled for purchase, her fingers scraping against the smooth glass, but there was nothing to hold. She fell. Her scream faded into the roar of the atmospheric processors below. Sable was falling too. Sable! Edwin yelled, reaching out over the abyss. One hand, a hand with extended claws, slammed into the metal support beam a meter below Edwin. Sparks flew as metal sheared against metal. She hung there, swinging over the 2-kilometer drop. Her other arm was clutching her side where a laser burn was smoking. Hold on! Edwin gasped, reaching down. Give me your hand. Sable looked up. Her eyes met his. The engine, she gasped, pain etched on her face. It is still calling. It is getting louder. Edwin, I can't hold on. Yes, you can, Edwin shouted. You are not dying today, I forbid it. That is a medical order. He grabbed her wrist. He hauled with everything he had, every muscle in his back screaming. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled her up. She hooked a leg over the beam, then the other. They collapsed together on the narrow metal girder, gasping for air, the shattered remains of the bridge gaping open beside them. Above them, the stampede of oxen had stopped at the edge of the broken bridge. Without a path, the trance seemed to break. The animals stood there, confused, shaking their heads. Edwin rolled over and looked at Sable. She was alive. "You crazy cat!" Edwin breathed, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. "You broke the bridge!" "It was a tactical structural failure," Sable wheezed, clutching her ribs. Edwin sat up, looking at the dark chasm where Cassandra had vanished. "She said love doesn't run the station," Edwin said quietly, wiping blood from his lip. Sable looked at him. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Her claws retracted, her touch gentle. "No," Edwin whispered, looking at the destruction Cassandra's ambition had wrought. "But greed certainly kills it." Suddenly, the comms unit in Edwin's pocket crackled. It was Naomi. "Edwin, Sable. Are you there?" "We are here," Edwin replied. "Cassandra is gone." "That is good," Naomi said, her voice tight with panic. "But we have a bigger problem. The cradle engine didn't stop. It felt Cassandra die. And now I am angry. It is opening the core fully. If we don't stabilize it in 10 minutes, the energy surge is going to crack the asteroid in half." Edwin looked at Sable. She stood up. The fear was gone from her face. "It is time," Sable said. "The heirs must answer." "We go together," Edwin said, standing beside her. "Together," she agreed. They turned and ran toward the service hatch that led down past the broken glass into the blinding light of the waking god. The cradle engine did not look like a machine anymore. It looked like a heart attack waiting to happen on a planetary scale. The spherical chamber, located 3,000 meters beneath the artificial crust of Asteria Hollow, was no longer dark. It was blinding. The liquid chrome sphere in the center was convulsing, expanding, and contracting with a violence that sent shockwaves through the floor plates. But the terrifying part was not the metal. It was the biology. Thick, luminous roots formed from billions of nanites locking together were erupting from the sphere. They lashed out like the tentacles of a drowning kraken, seeking purchase, seeking a connection. Where they touched the walls, steel turned into gray calcified bone. Where they touched the air, oxygen turned into ozone. "It is hyperventilating," Dr. Edwin shouted over the deafening roar of the chamber. "It is looking for a pilot, and it is panicking because it cannot find one." He and Sable stumbled onto the main gantry. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they were alive. However, they were not the first ones to arrive. Standing near the base of the engine, silhouetted against the blinding white light, was a figure that looked like a broken doll put back together with spite. Cassandra Pike was alive. Her pristine white suit was shredded, revealing the matte black undersuit of military-grade impact armor beneath. One of her gravity boots was sparking, likely the only reason she had survived the fall from the glass bridge. She moved with a limp, her face a mask of blood and unadulterated madness. And she was not alone. Around her the shadows were moving. The immune system of the cradle engine had manifested. They were not machines. They were the ancestors of the station's fauna, massive six-legged predatory cats with skin made of shifting silica scales. They were the genetic templates for everything Edwin had spent his life treating. But Cassandra wasn't fighting them. She was holding a device, a heavy, jury-rigged emitter, ripped from the Heliox lab, that was pulsating with a high-frequency shriek. The creatures were cowering, pinned back by the sonic pain, forming a perimeter around her. "I told you, Doctor," Cassandra screamed, her voice cracking as she saw them. She dragged a limp figure toward a metallic pedestal that rose from the floor like an altar. "Evolution does not wait for the ethical committee." "Sable," Edwin yelled. Cassandra had not wasted time. While Edwin and Sable had been navigating the service shafts, Cassandra had used her backup access codes to descend straight to the core. She slammed her hand onto the control console. "The engine wants a voice, I will give it a scream." She pointed the emitter at the guardian beasts. "Kill them! Tear them apart!" The beasts roared, shaking off the sonic suppression, and turned their glowing blue eyes toward Edwin and Sable. "Edwin," Sable whispered, her claws extending, though her body was trembling with exhaustion. "There are too many. 6 Alpha-class guardians. I cannot fight them all." Edwin looked at the creatures. They were terrifying. Muscles coiled like steel cables' teeth, capable of shearing through hull plating. They were designed to kill anything that threatened the heart of the station. But Edwin looked closer. He saw the dilated pupils. He saw the way their flanks heaved. He saw the erratic twitching of their tails. "They aren't aggressive," Edwin said, a sudden strange calm washing over him. "They are having a panic attack." He holstered his stun baton. "What are you doing?" Sable hissed. "Do not be a hero. Be a survivor." "I am a veterinarian, Sable," Edwin said, stepping forward, his hands raised, palms up. "And I don't treat patients by hitting them." He walked toward the pack of 6-legged nightmares. "Hey," Edwin called out, his voice dropping to a low, soothing register, the voice he used for spooked horses and traumatized dogs. "Easy now, I know. It is loud. The floor is shaking. It is scary, isn't it?" The lead guardian, a beast the size of a transport truck, lunged forward, snapping its jaws inches from Edwin's face. The wind from the bite blew Edwin's hair back. Edwin didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He held his ground. "I know," Edwin said softly. "You want to protect the nest, but you don't know where the threat is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch of dried protein treats, something he always carried for the strays in Sector 4. It was a ridiculous tiny gesture in the face of a god machine. He tossed the treats on the floor. "You aren't killers," Edwin said, looking the beast in the eye. "You are sheepdogs, and the sheep are frightened." The beast sniffed the treat. Then it looked at Edwin. The blue fire in its eyes dimmed. It whined a high, keening sound that sounded impossibly young for such a monster. "Sable," Edwin said without turning around. "Sing. Not to the machine. To them. Let them know we are part of the pack." Sable hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then she understood. She didn't use the destructive frequency she had used on the bridge. She used a low, thrumming purr, the sound of a mother comforting a litter. The vibration traveled through the floor. The guardians froze. Their ears swiveled toward Sable. The tension drained from their massive bodies. They weren't being controlled. They were being reassured. Cassandra watched in horror. "No attack, I command you." She frantically adjusted her emitter, cranking the pain frequency higher. But the beasts ignored her. They parted, creating a path for Edwin and Sable. They recognized the purr. It was the sound of the core, but gentler. "You can't command loyalty, Cassandra," Edwin said, walking past the confused monsters. "You have to earn it," Cassandra screamed in frustration and threw the emitter at them. It clattered uselessly on the floor. She grabbed a wicked-looking vibro knife from her belt and lunged at Sable. "If I can't control the key," Cassandra snarled, "I will break it so no one else can use it." Sable didn't run. She didn't dodge. She stepped forward to meet the charge. But before the blade could connect, a deafening explosion rocked the upper gantry. Boom. The heavy blast doors at the top of the chamber blew inward. "Get away from her," a voice roared. Harper Sato stood in the smoke, flanked by Rosa Cade and a dozen civilian miners, carrying improvised weapons wrenches, laser cutters, and mining drills. "It is over, Cassandra," Rosa yelled, holding a tablet high. "Naomi just broadcast the logs from your warehouse. The whole station knows about the nanites. They know about the sterility virus." "Lies," Cassandra shrieked, backing away toward the engine interface. "I am saving humanity from its own obsolescence." You are just a drug dealer in a fancy suit, Harper shouted. And your contract is terminated. The civilians surged forward, not as a mob, but as a wall of angry protective citizens. Cassandra looked at the angry crowd, then at the calm beasts, then at Edwin and Sable. She was cornered, her face twisted into a rictus of pure spite. "Fine," she whispered. "If Heliox cannot have the asset, then I will liquidate it." She spun around and slammed her hand onto the emergency purge lever of the Cradle engine's coolant system. "No," Rosa screamed. "She is dumping the thermal shielding," Edwin yelled. "The core will go critical in 60 seconds." The liquid chrome sphere turned an angry, violent red. The heat in the chamber spiked instantly. The air began to shimmer. "Burn!" Cassandra laughed, her eyes wide and vacant. "Burn it all down." Rosa didn't think. She didn't calculate. She ran. The chief engineer sprinted across the gantry, ignoring the heat that was already singing her eyebrows. She tackled Cassandra, slamming the corporate envoy into the railing. "Get off me!" Cassandra shrieked, slashing with a knife. Rosa grunted as the blade caught her shoulder, but she didn't let go. She used her momentum to swing Cassandra around, and with a roar of effort, shoved her away from the console. Cassandra stumbled, her bad leg giving out. She fell hard against the base of the engine. The nanite roots, sensing a threat, reacted instantly. They didn't attack. They simply absorbed. A thick, gray tendril lashed out and wrapped around Cassandra's ankle. She screamed as the nanites began to integrate with her armor, pulling her down, not to kill her, but to immobilize the foreign object. "Let me go," she wailed, as the gray matter crept up her legs. "I am the owner. I am the owner." "You are just biomass now," Rosa panted, clutching her bleeding shoulder. She slammed the coolant lever back into place. "System locked. Edwin. The temperature is dropping, but the engine is still unstable. It is awake and it is furious. You have to talk to it." Edwin looked at Sable. The engine was pulsing rapidly, the red light fading back to a blinding white. The air felt heavy, charged with static electricity that made their hair stand on end. "It is waiting," Sable said. Her voice was trembling. "It wants the air." She looked at the extraction device. Cassandra had set up a horrific metal frame designed to hold a body in place, while the machine ripped the consciousness out. "I have to get in," Sable said, stepping toward the clamps. "I have to let it take me." "No," Edwin said, grabbing her arm. "Edwin, there is no time," Sable cried. "Look at the walls. The lull bloom is expanding. If I don't give it a pilot, it will reset the biological hard drive of the entire station. Everyone will forget who they are forever." "We are not using the chair," Edwin said firmly. He kicked the extraction device over. It clattered to the floor with a satisfying crash. "Then how?" Sable asked, tears in her eyes. "It is too big. The signal is too strong. Without the dampeners, the connection will burn my mind out." "Not if you don't do it alone," Edwin said. He took her hand. He interlaced his fingers with hers, human skin against Felidari fur. "We share the load," Edwin said. "I am an anchor. You are the kite. You fly. I will hold the string." Sable looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of the alien god machine, but she saw the resolve that was stronger. "You will get hurt," she whispered. "I have good health insurance," Edwin smiled weakly. "Now, how do we say hello?" "We breathe," Sable said. "Close your eyes. Listen to the rhythm." Edwin closed his eyes. He felt Sable's hand tighten in his. He felt the heat of the engine on his face. And then he heard it. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the sound of a billion microscopic nanites shifting in unison. It was the sound of a planet dreaming. Sable began to purr. It started in her chest, vibrated through her arm, and traveled into Edwin. It was a resonance frequency that matched the engine perfectly. "I am here," the purr said. "I am listening," the engine replied. It wasn't a voice. It was a sensation. It felt like falling into a deep, cold lake on a hot day. It was a rush of data, of history, of memory. Edwin gasped. He saw images flashing behind his eyelids. He saw the station being built not by humans, but by tall, slender beings who sang to the metal. He saw the asteroid floating in the void for 1,000 years waiting. He saw the humans arrive digging like termites, noisy and chaotic. He felt the engine's confusion. It didn't hate the humans. It was just overwhelmed. It was like a mother trying to sleep while 1,000 children screamed in the room. It had created the lull bloom to quiet the noise, to make them sleep so it could think. Too loud, the engine pushed into Edwin's mind. Chaos, pain, silence needed. No, Edwin projected back. He didn't use words. He used the feeling he had when he set a broken bone. The feeling of calm. The feeling of fixing. Not silence. Harmony. The noise is just life. He felt Sable beside him. She was weaving the connection, translating his crude human emotions into the complex mathematical song of the Felidari. We are the keepers, Sable sang without words. We are the filter. We will organize the noise. The engine hesitated. It probed them. It tasted Edwin's stubborn kindness. It tasted Sable's fierce protectiveness. 2, the engine asked. Usually 1. 1 is lonely, Edwin thought. 2 is a partnership. The engine pulsed. A wave of pure white light exploded from the core. It passed through Edwin and Sable, through the walls, through the rock. It raced up the elevator shafts. It swept through the promenade. It touched every mind on Asteria Hollow. In the clinic, the lull bloom moss on the walls turned from angry red to a soft, dormant gray and crumbled into dust. In the residential district, a mother blinked and remembered the name of her daughter. In the mines, the dredge oxen stopped their panic and stood still, grazing peacefully on the synthetic algae. The pain vanished. The memory wipe reversed. The station took a deep, shuddering breath and stabilized. In the core chamber, Edwin and Sable collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Their hands were still locked together. "Did we do it?" Edwin wheezed. "Am I still Edwin?" "You are still Edwin," Sable laughed, a breathless sobbing sound. "And I am still Sable. We are still here." But the silence didn't last. A low, resonant tone filled the chamber. It wasn't aggressive. It was expectant. The nanite roots around the sphere rearranged themselves, forming a gentle cradle-like structure in front of them. "The pact is sealed," the engine's voice echoed in their minds. "The garden is safe. Now the payment." Edwin stiffened. "Payment." "The heirs," the engine stated. "I require the heirs." Edwin went cold. He looked at Sable. He looked at the nanite cradle. "It wants," Edwin stammered, his face turning red. "It wants babies. Now right here in front of Rosa and the miners." He looked at the crowd of rescuers on the gantry who were watching with bated breath. "That is biologically impossible to expedite," Edwin sputtered, panic rising. "I mean, the gestation period is, and we haven't even discussed dinner plans, let alone." Sable explained to the giant spaceball that these things take time. Sable stared at him for a second. Then she did something he had never seen her do. She laughed. She threw her head back and laughed, a rich, throaty, genuine sound that echoed off the chrome walls. She laughed until she had to clutch her sides. "Oh, Edwin," she gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. "You humans. You are so literal. Always thinking with your biology or your contracts." "I am a doctor." Edwin defended himself, feeling foolish. "Reproduction is a medical term. In my culture," Sable said, calming down but still smiling with a radiant warmth. "An heir is not a child you birth. An heir is a successor you choose." She pointed to the engine. "The engine is immortal, Edwin, but its memory buffer fills up. Every 300 years it needs to offload its consciousness to a living vessel to refresh itself. It needs a keeper to hold the old memories so it can start new ones. That is the heir, a living library." She looked at the nanite roots.
That is why I was exiled, Sable said softly. The mothers of my hive wanted me to take the throne. They wanted me to be the vessel for our planet's engine. But I refused. I didn't want to carry the ghosts of 1,000,000 years. I wanted my own life. So they called me broken and threw me away. She turned to Edwin. The lull bloom didn't find me by accident. The cradle engine here was lonely. It sensed a royal bloodline nearby. It called me. It caused the chaos to force me to come down here. It has been waiting for an heir for 1,000 years. Edwin stared at her. So it doesn't want our children. It wants you. It wants you to stay here and use its hard drive. It wants a guardian, Sable corrected. Someone to listen to the station, to tell it when to make rain, to tell it when to heal. She looked at the glowing sphere. It was waiting, patiently. If I say yes, Sable said, her voice serious, I become the Lady of the Hollow. I will be connected to every wire, every sensor. I will never be able to leave the station. My nervous system will be tied to the rock. She looked at Edwin. But I will not be a battery. I negotiated the terms during the sync. I set boundaries. Boundaries. I told it, Sable smiled, that I take weekends off, and I don't work nights. Edwin let out a long, shuddering breath. He felt like the weight of the universe had just lifted off his shoulders. So, Edwin said, rubbing the back of his neck. No babies. Not today, Sable winked. Unless you are offering. I think I will stick to veterinary medicine for now, Edwin muttered, his ears burning. Sable stepped closer to him. The humor faded, replaced by a deep, quiet emotion. You said something, Edwin, she whispered. Back in the clinic, when I tried to sell myself to you, you said you are worth more. I meant it, Edwin said. I know, Sable said. That phrase, it broke the spell. All my life I was told my worth was in my duty, in being a vessel. But you saw the person, not the purpose. She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. Because of that, I can choose this. I am not taking the job because I have to. I am taking it because this is my home now, and I want to keep it safe for the people who live in it, including the grumpy doctor. Edwin covered her hand with his. Well, Edwin said, every queen needs a royal physician. The benefits package better be good. Free health care, Sable grinned. And unlimited catnip. I will take it. Epilogue. 3 months later. The waiting room of the Sector 4 veterinary clinic was full. A young girl sat with a fluffball rodent that had a mild tummy ache. A miner waited with his dredge ox, which needed a hoof trim. The air smelled of antiseptic and lemon-scented cleaning fluid. The smell of ozone was gone. Next, Edwin called out, wiping his hands on a rag. Biscuit floated over. The drone had been repaired, sporting a shiny new ceramic shell, and a sticker that read, I survived the apocalypse, and all I got was this lousy sticker. Doctor, Biscuit chirped. You have a priority call on the private line. It is the administrator. Tell Rosa I submitted the budget forms yesterday, Edwin sighed. Not Administrator Cade, Biscuit corrected. The other administrator. The one who lives in the basement. Edwin smiled. He walked to the back office and tapped the comms unit. A holographic image flickered to life. It was Sable. She looked different. Her fur was glossy, her eyes bright. She was wearing a sleek, high-tech suit that wove organic fibers with station circuitry. She was sitting in a control chair deep in the core, surrounded by screens of data, but she looked relaxed, happy. Good morning, Your Highness, Edwin teased. Do not call me that, Sable groaned. Or I will turn off the gravity in your bathroom while you are shaving. Cruel abuse of power, Edwin noted. How is the patient? The station is holding steady at 98% efficiency, Sable reported. Oxygen levels are optimal. The vertical farms are producing a record harvest, and the fertility rates are back to normal. We had 3 babies born in Sector 7 last night. Good, Edwin said softly. Life finds a way.
Edwin, Sable said, her voice dropping a little. Are you coming down for dinner tonight? I found a recipe for synthetic salmon that supposedly doesn't taste like shoe leather. I will be there, Edwin promised. I just have to finish removing a thorn from a lizard's paw.
Don't be late,
Sable said softly.
the engine misses you.
It likes your calm.
And you?
Edwin asked. Sable smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Edwin had ever seen. I just miss you. The connection cut. Edwin stood there for a moment staring at the blank screen. He looked out the window at the busy promenade. People were walking, talking, laughing. They didn't know that beneath their feet a cat alien and a human vet were keeping the world spinning. And that was fine. Doctor, the little girl called from the waiting room. My hamster is sneezing. Edwin turned back to the door, buttoning his lab coat. Coming, he said. He was just a doctor. She was just an exile. But together, they had built a home out of a hollow rock. And that Edwin decided was worth more than all the heirs in the galaxy.